let's just dive into things. Can you talk about your beliefs around why mushrooms have this incredible potential to really help people out in terms of health and wellness?
Well, it's interesting because mushrooms are not only just a great food, and I'm sure we'll go into that and nutritional values, but mushrooms also have these kind of unique compounds in their cell walls called beta-glucans. And there is so much scientific research around beta-glucans and the properties that they have and the benefits they have in terms of actually modulating our immunity. And so in a sense, I look at them as almost a perfect food in that they're food as medicine. They not only nourish us on with the food value, but also they have these medicinal properties. So for me, they're very special. And I sort of consider them like the forgotten food or the missing link.
And when you talk about immunity, are we talking the common cold or are we talking cancer? Are we talking coronavirus? What do you mean by immunity?
Well, you know what? That's interesting because it could apply to all of those actually. Because a lot of when it comes to immunity, a lot of the tests are around anti-tumor studies, things like that, and how they've actually been used. Mushrooms have been used in Asia. Has been, in fact, they've developed a couple of drugs from medicinal mushrooms that they use as an adjuvant for cancer therapy. Now, don't get me wrong, because I normally don't talk about that subject because of what's and I'm not acting like it's any sort of a cure, but they use it in addition to normal therapies and primarily to help keep the immune system functional at a time when it's being torn down. So that's a big part of it. And I was reading recently about viruses, and it's so interesting because some of the tests that they do for to see if things have any sort of activity against viruses is just testing people when it comes to the common cold. Are you taking this and getting normal amount of colds or less amount of colds? It's an interesting way to do it.
Absolutely. It sounds like, and from my own experience too with mushrooms and experimenting with mushroom teas, they do kind of give your brain a chance to regrow. And I imagine just like regrowing, rejuvenation would help tremendously with cancer cells that are impaired and things like that.
Could be. I mean, certainly, if you're familiar with lion's mane, and not just lion's mane, actually, everybody kind of focuses on lion's mane as having this effect on nerve growth factor, which is a amino acid that actually helps to regulate and organize the production of neurons.
Yeah, because
And
it went beyond just immunity, right? It was like brain neuron growth.
yeah, there have been some studies that have actually shown regrowth, and that's pretty interesting in and of itself. So yeah, there are so many areas where mushrooms are effective and it's just and beneficial. So
Feel like
you
it's
know
brain food.
well, a lot of people kind of look at it that way, and it's I think it's just food for the whole body in so many different ways, and that's why I call it the missing link and the forgotten food because it's not a plant, it's not an animal. It sits in its own kingdom right in the middle of the two. And interestingly enough, studies that have been done, I mean, very large studies with large populations, and they give them a whole bunch of forms to fill out about diet and all the rest. What it has shown is that people who eat mushrooms regularly, according to these studies, live longer.
Absolutely. Why has it been the missing link?
Well, it hasn't been missing in Asia. It
Mm,
really hasn't. I mean, in Asia, they have at least 12 different species that are in the market at any time. So they have been eating mushrooms regularly for thousands of years. So have Eastern Europeans, Russians, French, basically Europeans. But something happened to Anglos, like in the UK, and then all of the people that came to the US. Um, they I don't know whether you could call it mycophobia, fear of mushrooms, or something, but it did kind of limit their acceptance of them, other than one species that they cultivated. And then when it came to the US, it's sort of like the same thing. Although a lot of immigrant groups that came to the US definitely love mushrooms and go out and forage for wild mushrooms. But in terms of cultivated mushrooms in the marketplace, really the button mushroom, the agaricus mushroom, has been the main mushroom in the market up until probably the 80s, when we started to see what I might call specialty mushrooms emerge.
And you had a role in that as well. I believe you was it the shiitake mushroom or some mushroom that started with an S? I believe that was your company Namex that started mass
Well,
producing.
actually, I went to work on a very large commercial button mushroom farm in 1973. I mean, this farm had 200 employees. It grew 2 million pounds of agaricus mushrooms a year. But we had a Japanese scientist there. He was the director of R&D, and he was growing shiitake, oyster mushrooms, and enoki mushrooms. So I was directly involved in that. And in 1978, this company introduced fresh shiitake to the market in the Seattle area where this company was located. So that was literally the first commercial shiitake on any scale that was put into the marketplace, 1978. I mean, think about it for a minute. I actually had access to fresh shiitake in the 70s. It was amazing.
Why was it amazing? Like, I mean, I know shiitake is like a staple these days that you can get at the stores and everything. Was it the flavor that took off? Was it something new? Or something else I want to talk to you about too. Do these different mushrooms, do they have different health benefits? Like, did shiitake give one health benefit and another mushroom is a different health benefit? But let's just stick with shiitake and why it mushroomed out, I guess you could say, in popularity. Why do you think shiitake became so popular back then?
Well, for one, shiitake was one probably the largest amount of shiitake being produced. It's probably the number one mushroom being produced in Asia, and it was famous and in Japan and in China, and it's a delicious mushroom. It is really good. And so introducing that into the United States was just kind of like, okay, here's a mushroom, we've got the technology, we know how to grow it, let's bring it over to the US and let's get started. And so a lot of entrepreneurs in the late 70s and all through the 80s were starting to grow shiitake and starting to slowly introduce people to it. And so that's why shiitake was the first one, and that's why for me, I mean, I had been reading about all these other mushrooms, and as a wild mushroom hunter, I was familiar with eating other species of mushrooms. But shiitake doesn't grow in North America, so that's something that we can't get. I mean, an oyster mushroom does, an enoki mushroom does, although not necessarily. Enoki's not easy to find, but shiitake no. And oh man, Jared, have you eat fresh shiitake, right?
I mean, I'm down for it. I don't really buy it, but like I'd be
Oh
so
man.
down for it.
Okay, you've got to get started here.
How do I cook some shiitake mushrooms or like
Well, I'll tell you. I'll tell you how to cook mushrooms generally, but you know what? Shiitake in China, the word for shiitake is shangu. That means fragrant mushroom, and the fragrance of shiitake is heavenly, and the
Uh,
flavor is so good.
mm,
And it's grown on naturally on either wood logs or sawdust logs. It's a wood decomposer, and again, it's got these medicinal benefits as well, which just makes it even better to put this food into the diet.
that's awesome. I love these new ways of like thinking about food. How do you cook shiitake mushrooms? I'm
Right.
imagining it's olive
Okay.
oil, garlic.
Well, you know what? I've got very simple tastes. And here's the key to cooking mushrooms in general is cook them in a hot pan. I fry them up. I whatever is your oil of choice. I use olive oil or sometimes even butter, and don't slice them too thin. Slice any mushroom maybe a quarter of an inch thick because they will shrink. The hot pan will seal in the moisture of the mushroom. If you cook it on a low heat, what happens is the water all comes out of the mushrooms, and now they're sitting in a pool of
Ah,
water, and they're all soggy and slimy. And you've ever heard people say, "Ah, mushrooms, they're so slimy." That's why they're not cooked properly. If you put them in a hot pan and sort of brown them off, then they actually come out of the pan almost dry, but they still have the moisture locked into them. So hot pan, at least 10 minutes if you're frying them up. Try to get them on both sides. That's what I do. I mean, sometimes I'll even get in there and start turning them over by hand just to
sure.
get them seared on both sides and have that just nice browning on them. A little salt, a little pepper, and fabulous alone, any mushroom, or you can put it into so many things because they're so versatile with their flavors. They can go into stir fries, eggs, you
Ah.
name it. You can put mushrooms, add mushrooms to whatever dish you're making. It's really they're a versatile food.
How many mushrooms for you personally does it, if you're just eating mushrooms, does it take for you to fill up? Like 2 handfuls, because I know they got some hardiness to them. I know they're like yeah, they got some I don't know whether that's protein, but they kinda will sit with you for a little bit. Like, how much mushrooms would you eat to as a that would keep you satisfied for, like, a few
Well,
hours?
that is such an interesting question, because, well, for one, for me, I mean, just recently, for example, I took a medium-sized button mushroom, and a button mushroom is the agaricus. Took a medium-sized agaricus. I weighed it up. It weighed 40 grams. Are you familiar with grams?
Yeah, a bit.
Ounce and a
That
half,
seems like
basically,
a that's
40 grams, ounce and a
okay,
half. I mean,
okay.
it's like pretty heavy. So let's just say um, five of those at 40 grams, that's 200 grams. I mean, that's half a pound of mushrooms. I could do that in a sitting, no problem. So one mushroom is not a lot. And when you cut them up and you fry them up, they shrink. So you'll think, oh God, I've got way too many. But no, when you cook them up, it's like, oh, I don't have enough. Um, so so for me, that's very normal. And I'm a meat eater. I love to have my mushrooms on the steak. I really won't eat a steak or a piece of meat without
Oh,
it.
yeah.
I'll even
Oh,
chop them up and chop up some onions with them and then work
mm,
them into ground beef so that the hamburger that I'm cooking has got mushrooms in it. And these days it's interesting. I just talked to somebody yesterday. They're saying, "Oh yeah, we use portobellos as the bun because I think they didn't eat grains, and we put the burger in between two
that's
portobellos
awesome.
as the bun." And then I know other people that basically put the portobello between two pieces of bread and use it as kind
That's
of
the
like
word.
the burger. So it's interesting how it all works.
And
and
I talked with a
and
food researcher too, of another food researcher. Her name is Amy Alt, and she said that customers liked, in terms of burgers, they liked the mushroom blend more than just pure beef. She was like doing consumer research for a company, and one way to like lower costs was to put mushrooms, mix it in with the meat patty, and people liked it more too, and they knew it was mushroom, so it was really a win-win situation.
no, that's actually right. I've
Yeah,
seen that research, and,
huh,
and they presented it. I mean, it was some of like 50%. mushroom in the burger, 40% what, and ultimately it was like people liked that better than just the plain
Yeah,
hamburger.
and this
So
and these were, like, even, I think they had the highest rates among, like, millennials, like but it was pretty high too for, like, the redneck guy with, like, a cowboy hat, like,
yeah, sure.
even they were getting on board, like, "Yeah, this just tastes better."
This, yeah. Well, again, that's what I do when I cook up a, a a hamburger or something. I do basically chop up the mushroom and work it in, and so yeah, a lot of companies are looking at that as a way to I mean, people who don't want to eat as much meat, and a way to enhance the flavor. It's all good. And in terms of the whole thing of getting full and so on, that's interesting because mushrooms are actually high in carbohydrates, but those carbohydrates are not starches. They're actually one of the major carbohydrates in a mushroom is mannitol, which is actually a very slow acting carbohydrate, which is kind of what we're after. And the other carbohydrate in there are these beta glucans. So you've got two very positive carbohydrates that you're consuming, and mushrooms do actually fill you up, and so that's a good thing for people that are, watching their weight or anything like that. It's a great way, and not only that, the mushroom is also something. There's a maitake, which they've got studies that show it's very good for lowering blood sugar. So you've got all these benefits right there as just another segment of the number of benefits that we've got.
Absolutely, and so are just talking about these different types of mushrooms, are they all kind of the same? Lion's mane, chaga, reishi, are they all kind of the same? They all give more or less the same benefits, the same filling,
Well, yeah, yes and no. Yes and no. Let's
yes
let's
and no.
let's break it down a little bit because first of all, every species will have a different nutritional profile.
Yeah.
As an example, the button mushroom, the agaricus, will have 20% or 35% protein. The shiitake will have 20% protein. And we're talking about high quality protein in the sense that they've got um, all of the essential amino acids with the exception of one or two. So they're a really good protein, especially for somebody who's on a vegetarian diet. It's
Yeah.
great to put mushrooms into your diet for that. So in that sense, but then the other thing about it is that the beta glucan levels in the different mushrooms will
What
be
is a
different.
beta-glucan? Is that found in blueberries too, Or
Well,
is it
no,
just in
actually,
mushrooms?
no. A beta glucan is actually a string of glucose molecules. It's a polysaccharide. Okay, and we know saccharides just individual sugars, but when you put a string of them together uh, uh, with certain bonds, then they're called a polysaccharide. And a beta glucan is a very specific type of polysaccharide, and the polysaccharides have specific branchings. So these are called beta 1,3, which is the main stem of this polysaccharide, 1,6, which is a branching. Now, you could have heard of beta glucans from um, oats. Grains have beta glucans, but it's a beta 1,3,1,4.
What's the
This,
difference
well, the ultimate difference
in
is
terms of how
that
it impacts you and stuff? Yeah.
yeah, the difference is that those are not immunologically active, but
Oh,
beta glucan is considered when it comes to grains. Beta glucan is considered fiber, and so that's why people think of, oh yeah, oats. Oats are really beneficial for us, and certain grains because they have a lot of fiber, and oat has a lot of fiber. So they would talk about oat beta glucan, and that would be due to the fiber. Mushrooms have a lot of fiber too. That's the other thing. Mushrooms, these beta glucans are fiber, but with this beta 1316 glucan, it has these immunological activities, and we actually have receptor sites in our lower intestines that when these beta 1316 come along, they go right to those receptor sites, and then they can enhance the production
Huh.
of immune cells
So
like
it's a similar
macrophages.
fiber to oats, but it also has the added immunological. And you were talking in terms of the immune benefits, like you mentioned, some mushrooms can have studies of some that kind of stimulate growth in the brain, and it was what other like what do you mean by immunological? Is that like more white blood cells? Is that
Well,
like
well,
you know what I mean?
it's the production of these immune cells, macrophages, NK cells, T cells,
Uh,
and they're producing all these cytokines, and that's essentially when we see or feel or there's an invader of some sort. That's when these cells are produced, like viruses or bacteria or even other fungi, these pathogens. Well, then these immune cells will flood out and essentially greet them, so to speak, and take care
hello.
of them. Yeah. So that's where the struggle is, right?
Yeah.
And that's what immunity is all about. And so people who have a low immunity will be very susceptible to these other microorganisms. And that those are the people that really would benefit the most. If you've already got a strong immunity, you probably, it's like I would still say eat mushrooms, but you might not be needing to supplement with mushrooms because if your immunity is strong. And then let's just get back to the common cold. If you are susceptible and every winter you're like, oh man, I've got a cold again in December, and then oh man, I've got a cold again in March, and you know then you might go, well, I should probably supplement if you're not like just eating mushrooms
What
all
would
day.
you recommend to supplement? Like, would you
Well,
recommend like what mushroom if someone's gonna if they're, susceptible to colds and they want to boost their immune system, what mushroom would you recommend?
well, I would recommend probably as my number one for this would be reishi.
Mm.
Reishi has, and one of the things that my company does is we test all of our product lots for beta glucans. We've been doing that now for 4 years, and we have a tremendous body of data on the different levels of beta glucan in all of the medicinal mushrooms. And it's really interesting, Jared, because certain mushrooms that are really well known for immunological benefits are the ones that have the highest amount of beta glucans. Reishi has 50% beta glucan. Same with a mushroom called turkey tail. Now shiitake, which is a good immunological mushroom, has 30% beta glucan. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that is directly in terms of, okay, this is better than the other thing, but it's just interesting that these particular species that we look upon, like reishi, as being such a important medicinal mushroom, ends up having the highest level of beta glucans. So
That
so
makes sense.
so for me, I'm saying reishi, and reishi also has these really interesting compounds called triterpenoids. And triterpenoids work with the liver to
Huh.
help with liver function and with our blood. So in a sense, and very few of the other mushrooms have these triterpenoids. One of the few that does would be chaga. All of these mushrooms have the beta glucan, some in lower amounts, like chaga, for example, 10% beta glucan. But it's got these triterpenoids, which give it a sort of the extra part that it needs to be a beneficial medicinal mushroom.
Got you.
So I'm usually saying to most people, they say,
What do
okay,
the
pick one
triterpenoids
mushroom.
do? Wait, what do the
Well,
triterpenoids do?
again, they work with the liver
The
in
liver. Yeah,
terms of, yeah, the liver
got you.
function there. They work with our liver function. Triterpenoids have also shown um, anti-tumor effects and immunological effects in their own right. So when you put the two together, you've got something that stands a little bit higher than, let's just say, the others. Most of the medicinal mushrooms will have enough of these beta glucans, and here's the interesting part, because all mushrooms have beta glucans, but what makes some mushrooms actually medicinal is the fact that the structure of the beta glucan, even though they're all 1316 and they're branching for the most part, those branchings can still be different enough. So in all the testing that scientists have done, they will demonstrate that certain of these mushrooms are more active than others. So even mushrooms that we're eating as food will have beta glucans, and that'll be a big part of the fiber, but they may not have the same strength of immunological activity.
So, in terms of like actually getting these into your diet and looking at like commercial products and things like this, I know that I've been using mud, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But when I emailed you and told you like, hey, like I'm really excited. I use this thing called mud. You mentioned that mud was grown on oats basically. So like mud is I'll just explain it real quick. It's basically a blend of mushrooms that and you can explain more, but they're grown on oats. And so I'm wondering what your thoughts are on the best way to get mushrooms. Like, is it best to just go to the store and get shiitake or reishi? I'm imagining reishi might be hard to find, although I don't quite know. But and if there's these different immunological properties from all these mushrooms, wouldn't it make sense just to like get a blend, like something like mud, or perhaps you have a different idea on what the products are? So just like I know that was a lot. Let's just keep things simple.
Let me I
Hopefully
know
we can come back and piece these threads together. But
I know exactly where to start here.
okay, cool.
Yeah. So so let's first of all, let's just talk about this fungal organism that we call a mushroom. And mushrooms don't have seeds. So how do we grow these things? They don't even have seeds, you
Yeah.
know? So, okay, mushrooms produce spores. Those spores in nature are out, they're in the air and they're out and they're floating around and they land on the ground or on a piece of wood when conditions are right, which generally certain temperature and moisture, fungi and spores need moisture to germinate. When those spores germinate, they germinate into a very fine thread like filament. And when multiple spores germinate and those filaments come together, they form a network. And the network of these filaments is called mycelium. Mycelium is the vegetative body of this fungus. And what mycelium does, and it's really cool because mycelium is breaking down all of that organic matter that we've got in the environment. I mean, it's a number of different, the bacteria will be doing that, and yeasts and little critters are breaking it all down too. But it's part of breaking down all the organic matter and turning it back into humus. And as it's doing that, it's growing and it's building up reserves of energy so that when the time is right, like here in the Northwest in the fall, the temperature falls, it starts to rain, humidity's going up comes a mushroom. So that mycelium, the vegetative body, is now producing this mushroom. The mushroom pops up. A lot of times we're like, where did that come from, right? Well, the mycelium is
Like a
underground.
it's like a net
We
sort
don't
of.
see it.
Yeah,
It's
it's like a
underground, or it's in a piece of wood, and we can see it if we look closely after we've picked the mushroom out of the ground. We can look down and move the dirt around, and we can see the mycelium there.
what's it look like?
It's white, stringy, thread-like growth. Have you ever seen a mold?
Yeah.
And when molds first start to grow, they're kind of like a white fuzzy kind of growth, and then they turn color. And the color, when they turn a color, that's when you're like, okay, I got to get rid of this right away, because when they turn
Yeah.
color, what's happening is they're sporulating, and you don't want to breathe the spores. It's really important.
Uh,
So
yeah.
what's
Yeah.
happening now is then the mushroom pops up, and as it matures, the cap opens up. There's gills underneath. Some mushrooms have pores. Those gills and pores produce spores. Out they come, and now we've got this life cycle completed. So think about it as this mushroom has three plant parts. And that's important in the supplement industry, because when you buy a supplement, it might be the root, it might be the fruit, it might be the flower, it might be the leaf. There's all sorts of parts of different plants that have more or less of the medicinal compounds. Okay, so we've got a spore, we've got mycelium, and we've got mushroom. Now, traditionally, the mushroom is what is being utilized in traditional Chinese medicine. That's what is being utilized. And when we grow mushrooms for the most part on wood, because most of these medicinal mushrooms are wood decomposers. So we grow them on a wood log, we grow them on a sawdust log. And when we are ready to harvest them, we just pop them off the log and clip the bottom of them off so we don't have any sawdust on it or wood on it. We've got the mushroom. Now, what happens is that mushroom growing is expensive. Do you know that mushrooms are still harvested by hand?
Yeah, and like
Every
you can't grow
single
like
mushroom.
crops of them, right? You can't just have like lines and lines of rows of mushrooms. I mean, you
Well,
gotta have wood and stuff like that, or maybe you can, but it's
well,
harder.
yeah. I mean, so the bottom line is that they're expensive, and because they're expensive to produce. I mean, think about this: is that I take my mushrooms into the marketplace, my fresh mushrooms, and somebody pays me $5 a pound. Great, I can make a business out of that. But supplements are dry powders. Now, when I dry that mushroom out and it's 90% water, just like most vegetables, it's not a vegetable, but like most vegetables, 90% water. Now you've got to get $50 for that same pound of mushrooms, because you've only got a tenth of what you had when it was fresh. The economics don't work. And that's why we grow
Uh,
all of our mushrooms in China, which I first went to in 1989. But here's the point that I'm getting to, is that so what happens
you
is
grow
in
it
the
on oaks.
United States, what they do is, since they cannot grow mushrooms for supplements, they grow the mycelium. They grow it on grain, which is an unnatural substrate. Substrate meaning what it's growing on. And then after 30 to 60 days, the mycelium covers all that grain. Then they take it out and they put it into a dryer. They dry it and grind it to a powder. There is no mushroom produced. Now,
Wow,
remember that,
wow,
no mushroom produced. What they have simply done is ground up the
wow.
mycelium
Huh.
and all of the grain that it's growing on. It would be like me taking
Huh.
that mushroom and all the sawdust it was growing on and drying that and putting it all together and selling it to you. But no. So what
Yeah.
happens is that when you measure those products, they are mostly grain starch with very little beta-glucan in them, because the amount of actual fungal matter is
Yeah.
really low. So that's
See
kind
that.
of what I was telling you about. And this is very important, because just like when we're just talking here,
Yeah.
you said, well, so what is this mycelium grown on? Then you grow your mushrooms on wood. What is it grown on? And it kind of like, okay, whatever's grown on is not being added to it. But no, I mean, we don't sell you the sawdust or the wood when a
Yeah,
mushroom is grown, but they're basically selling you the grain that the mycelium is grown on. And unfortunately, Jared, and here's the worst part
yeah.
about it, is that
Oh, for real.
they sell the product as mushroom.
Yeah,
It's not a mushroom. There's no
it's not.
mushroom in it. It's
I see
not a
that now.
mushroom, and that's the
Yeah,
issue. And
I'm
that's what
feeling
you
a
have to
little.
be.
I'm feeling. Well, what am I feeling right now? I'm feeling, I guess, disappointed. Like, ah, damn, like the product that I've been using. You know, I kind of sensed when we emailed back like a couple weeks ago. I was like, ah, shit, like the product I'm using, like
Well, and you
I
know
kind
what?
of could kind of picked up on it.
I
But I
don't.
see what you're saying now, and I'm grateful to know that know the difference or know how to tell the difference. I believe on the label for mud it said grown on. It was like all these mushrooms, but grown on oats. It said that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And you know what? Look, I don't name names of products or anything. I'm just trying to educate people to exactly how that product that they're taking is produced. And
Sure.
unfortunately, so
Yeah.
many of these products out there in the marketplace are this mycelium, which is the vegetative body grown on a grain, and then the grain is not removed because they can't. It's like just right there with the mycelium. They can't remove it. So they grind it up, grain and all. And unfortunately, the worst thing is that the label makes you think, because they're
Yeah.
saying it's mushroom, they make you think
Yeah.
you've got a mushroom product when you don't have a mushroom product.
What are good commercial, like, I want to know about the supplements because that's probably, are there good supplements that are actually, I know you have some on namex.com. I'm upset you don't have a blend of them. Come
We
on, man.
do. We do.
Dude,
No, we do.
on
Yeah.
Namex on your website?
No, the
Oh.
we have a retail side that where we
Oh.
sell the products on the internet in capsules or pouches. It's called realmushrooms.com.
Ah. Cool.
Yeah, yeah, and
Okay,
we can
cool.
talk
That's
about
why I
that
missed it.
afterwards. I'm
Yeah,
not here
I'll
to
link to that.
promote the company or
Realmushrooms.com.
anything.
Yeah,
Yeah,
okay, cool.
yeah, Namex is business to business. So we sell to other companies book powders. They put them out under their own brand, their own label. One of the things that we do that no one else does really, except maybe our customers, is we on every label we will put the amount of beta glucan, not less than X amount of beta glucan. Now, here's the other thing that you have to be watching for. A lot of companies will say, "Oh, we've got 40% polysaccharide." 50% polysaccharide. Beta glucans are polysaccharides. So it's like, oh wow, that's great. Look at all these polysaccharides. You know what else is a polysaccharide? Starch.
Yeah, I
So
see.
so grain starch. They're measuring grain starch.
Oh, I mean,
It's it's
yeah.
it's it's tough. I
It's
tell
a
you, it's
wild,
tough.
it's not regular, or it's not quite regulated. It's growing, and you can get away with some stuff like that.
Well, here's the issue: is that actually the supplement industry is really regulated. So
Oh,
the
huh.
products you get will probably be clean.
Yeah,
They won't have the heavy metals in them or microorganisms, things like that. But it's just like these products I'm talking about. They're made in a lab. They're made on organic grains. They're kosher. They've got
yeah,
all the different little merit badges that people look for, but they're still just grain powder with some mycelium on them.
yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, I feel it. I feel it.
Yeah,
So that's
it's
some of the ways that you control for quality is by listing the amount of beta glucans specifically instead of just the polysaccharides.
Oh yeah, polysaccharides means nothing now. If you see a product and it's talking polysaccharides, just don't even bother with it. And the other thing too is if you see a product that says made in the USA, you know right away that that's what this product is. That it's this myceliated grain. Do you ever eat tempeh?
Oh yes, I've had it. It's been a while, but I've had it before.
Do you know what it is?
I don't know what it is.
Yeah. Well, tempeh is a food made in Indonesia. it is cooked soybeans with a fungus grown on it.
Yeah, that was it. That was it. Yes.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Well, you know what that fungus is? It's a fungus. It's a specific a type of fungus. It's what we call an imperfect fungus. It doesn't produce a mushroom or anything like that. So it's basically when you eat tempeh, you're eating mycelium.
Ah,
Yeah,
I never
yeah,
knew
yeah.
that.
So
Yeah. Back
so
in the day, we had tempeh. I lived at a I think this is where I had it, but I lived at a monastery for a Buddhist meditation place for a while,
yes,
and they
yes,
loved it.
yes,
It was,
of
and I remember
course.
it was like a brown bean, and it was kind of had a sharp taste to it. I really liked it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, see that is what these companies are manufacturing. They're manufacturing a tempeh-like product, and I just say, look, that's a food product. Put it out there as a novel food product, but it's not mushroom, and it's definitely not medicinal mushroom.
Yeah. Um, I hear you. So we'll link to your website and therealmushroom.com because that could be a great place for. I'm gonna try to. I'm gonna once I finish up mine. Well, no, I'm gonna look at your site and get my next thing to add into like tea and coffee to get some blend from you. Yeah, so I'm excited to try it out.
Yeah,
Um,
well, one of the things about mushrooms too that you need to know is that every single species is going to have a special taste to it. It'll have its own flavor. So that's what's really cool about them. Whereas, most of these products that are grown on grains, they're bland. They
mm,
taste almost all the same. And it's just kind of like one of the companies that sells them actually says the best thing about our products is they don't taste like mushroom. Can you imagine?
that's funny. Yeah, I'm kind of I don't know, just aghast, but also not surprised at all that there's mislabeling. I feel like that just represents the nutrition industry. That's why I'm into intuitive eating is getting people to listen to themselves, listen to their own
Yes.
body's wisdom. There's a lot of nutrition science and confusion out there. But I
Yes.
do want to talk about some kind of wrapping up today. But what about psychedelic mushrooms? Do you talk about that as well? I've recently been I listened to a podcast with Paul Stamets,
Mhm.
and he was really proposing these incredible benefits of microdosing psychedelic mushrooms as being, stimulating neurogenesis and being as safe as Tylenol. And, it just kind of reminded me of like, it just seemed like, wow, this really represents the incredible potential that these mushrooms can have for people. And this was a psychedelic mushroom specifically. What are your kind of thoughts on psychedelic mushrooms?
Well, I mean, look, I grew up in the '60s. I'm very familiar with
Sure.
psychedelic
Yeah.
mushrooms. I mean, they were actually part of my study when I was at university, and so I'm very familiar.
Yeah.
So
Are they on realmushrooms.com, your website? Do you
well,
sell
we
them
don't
or
sell them, of course.
you do not? Because
Oh
they're
no,
illegal.
they're. I
Yeah,
mean,
yeah,
they're illegal.
yeah, yeah. Yeah,
But
yeah, yeah, yeah,
but
yeah, yeah.
but let me just say this: there's been a lot. They made them all illegal back in the '60s, and that cut off the scientific use of them because they were using them a lot for at that point. They were using them in addiction therapy. They were using them for mental health issues. I mean,
Yeah.
larger doses, right? And
What was
using
his
for
book?
end of
Who
life.
Michael Pollan's book, that book really detailed a lot of that.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a
How to change
tremendous
your
amount
mind.
of
How to change your
research.
mind. Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of
I was
research there.
stunned by the amount of research that was going on in the 60s. Like, I mean, it was everywhere. And then it got shut down. And nowadays it's back everywhere. Like every major university is researching, I believe, psychedelic mushrooms.
Yeah, yeah.
Because you're able to synthesize them. From my understanding, you're able to synthesize them as opposed to like another psychedelic drug. Like I don't know quite the details, but I don't know, like, what do you think about microdosing or, you know, yeah, what are your thoughts on
Well, I think microdosing is really interesting, and I think it's something that people should definitely try and see what what benefits might come from it.
Yeah.
To me, it's a microdosing is a whole new area, because the
Yeah.
mushrooms have never been used in that way traditionally. Traditionally,
Yeah.
mushrooms were used for healing purposes by indigenous groups, and so in the '60s, really, that's kind of how people used them in the sense of having a either religious experience or something like that. But you know what? They've also been used recreationally, and I don't mind that. I think that's fine as long as they're used properly, which properly means you're
Yeah.
doing it in the right place. You don't want to do it when you're out walking around the city and you're going, "Oh my God, I'm going
Yeah.
crazy here." And at the same time, you don't want to do it when you've got a something on your mind that is weighing heavily on it, and that's just called setting, and that's something that we learned about back in the '60s, and it was certain people were talking about. So that's really important. But in terms of doing microdosing, to me, I just think, well, try it out. Get yourself a good scale. Something that will be weighing up micrograms, and then get some somewhere. I mean, they're out there. I
Yeah.
mean,
Yeah.
listen, there are thousands of tons of these mushrooms being cultivated every year out there all over the world.
Yeah.
So it's not that difficult to find them. And then you can do your own study on the microdosing, and just to see, okay, and start out low, maybe 100 milligrams, and maybe even then you could kind of, okay, I didn't really feel much, so let's bump it up to 200 milligrams and see what that does, and then just proceed and see whether you're getting any specific benefits, whether it's cognitive enhancement, or maybe it's just general appreciation of the environment. I mean, maybe all of a sudden everything becomes a little sharper, maybe your mind becomes a little clearer, maybe you see things in a little bit different way, and so there's a lot of possibilities with that. I think it's really an interesting concept, and I don't think, I mean, some people talk about, oh yeah, you do it in a stack or something like that. It's like, you don't need to
Sure.
do it in a stack. You just need to do it on its own, and just see how you feel. And if you're probably a
No,
pretty
I've done it.
sensitive
I'm
guy with a
starting to
pretty
get into it.
clean.
Yeah, I'm starting to get into it. I wonder how much a microdose is. I've just been doing maybe like a pinky, like the amount of my pinky fingernail,
You'd
not
better
my
buy
whole
a
pinky finger.
scale, Jared.
Can eyeball it.
Yeah, I mean, eyeballing it is like, no. Well, how much did I have last
Is
time?
this like 200 milligrams, like the tip?
You know what?
How much
There's
is 200
really
milligrams? How do
there's
I?
really cheap scales out there that weigh in milligrams, and that's the best way to do it, because
Got you.
then you can, and
But yeah, I mean, so what intrigued me about Paul Stamets was he was saying like you might not even feel anything, but the research is clear that it's still stimulating like brain growth, and so that was what's interesting to me. I'd have this tea and I wouldn't feel any different, but I guess there's a ton of research going on at major universities that are basically saying like, hey, this could be pretty good, like and it doesn't trip people out. People, the whole tripping and religious experience can seem so far out. But if this doesn't even make you feel any different, but yet there's benefits, that's what kind of
oh,
intrigues
oh,
me. You know what
oh,
I mean? Like,
yes,
I mean,
yeah,
maybe I felt like maybe I just was in a good mood or something, but like that could have been the placebo effect too.
I
So I
know.
mean, and I'm sure the placebo effect is real because of the other mushroom thing I was using and feeling
Yeah,
better.
yeah,
So
it's
yeah,
something where people, I mean, everybody's got to experiment it with it and just kind of figure it out. At some
yeah,
point, too, it's important to maybe go, okay, let me just try 500 milligrams and see whether that takes me up to the edge of a threshold where I can go, oh, okay, now I'm starting to feel this other, and then you can go, okay, now I know kind of I got a threshold line at 500. Let me back off to 400 or 300. And the other thing to remember too, when you're sourcing them, is that not every batch, let's just say this, there's a lot of what we would call different strains out there. And that means a different cultivar. So maybe there might be 1,000 different cultivars that people are growing, and and there would be a range
yeah,
of the compounds that are being produced. Some cultivar will produce more than another.
True.
it's kind of like different species will produce more of the psilocybin than another species. So that's the other side of it. Don't necessarily expect that. Let's say you purchase
Yeah,
some, or somebody's given you some, and then you get some from somebody else. Don't expect them to be exactly the same. They'll be close, but not exact.
that makes sense. I want to wrap up today just by having you tell the audience where people can either connect with you personally or buy your products or learn more about you.
Well, we have a lot of great information on our Namex website, namex.com, NAMMEX.com. A lot of good information. I've also got some really good slideshows there that show how we grow our mushrooms, how we process them.
There
So
was
there's
a picture
a
of your plant or your where you grow, and it's an environmentally friendly building. I believe it's in like San Diego somewhere.
no,
There's
I think you're
pictures of
looking at
that.
that picture is actually our warehouse.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's not actually where we're producing them or growing them, but we do
gotcha.
have pictures of that in the website. I mean, actual slideshows that show all of that. So definitely come to the Namex website. If you're interested in the products and wish to try some out, come to realmushrooms.com. And that's where we've got pouches or encapsulated products there. And one of the products, just for you, is a 5 mushroom combo.
It's like a
And
blend. It's like a blend, or
yes, it's a blend,
sweet.
5 mushroom blend. And on this whole issue of blends, look, don't get caught up thinking more is better, because that's what a lot of companies do. It's like the kitchen sink products out there that's like all you ever have to ever take again
Yeah,
is this one product because we've put everything in the world in there, including the kitchen sink. It's like, no, that's because I've seen 10 mushroom blends. I've seen 16, 17 mushroom blends. And I've even seen somebody with a 24 mushroom blend. And unfortunately, most of those products end up being those
yeah,
myceliated
yeah.
grain tempeh products. But I figure, what happens is that as you keep adding these new species in there, all you do is dilute the really powerful one. So I always say to anybody, look, 5 is the top. That's the ceiling for these. Any more than that, you're diluting what you've got there in terms of the mushrooms with the most benefits. So we have one product that has 5 in a blend. We call it the 5 Defenders. And that's really a great immunological product. It's really good.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much for coming on. I've enjoyed this conversation. I learned a lot, so I'm really excited about just spreading the word about mushrooms.
Awesome. Well, thank you very much for having me, Jared. It's really been a pleasure.